Caleb can take it away.
All right, thanks, Cody. Can y'all hear me?
Yep, and we see you.
Okay, good. So I've got the rather provocative title, I think, is the Loess Canyons ecoregion, one of the greatest conservation success stories of the Great Plains. We have a huge amount of co-authors here, pretty much all the Twidwell lab, including Dr. Daniel Uden, who is a new assistant professor at the UNL. And this is a photo of the Loess Canyons taken by Dylan Fogarty from a couple of years ago, an area where they burnt and is clearly regenerating from eastern red cedar encroachment. So we're just going to tackle this question throughout this talk, and I'm going to give you some ideas of why I think and why our lab thinks this is the case, that the Loess Canyons is the greatest conservation success story in the Great Plains. One of the biggest points of this is that the Great Plains as a whole is transitioning from a grassland to a woodland, right? So this is a slide that's been used by our lab several times. It's showing the Great Plains ecoregion in the maps, and this idea of the grasslands losing resilience and transitioning from a grassland, which is sort of represented by this bluish area and the trees in the red. From 2000 to 2018, you see how much ground we've lost, right? It's a lot, and Nebraska is featuring primarily in it. Not only that, these grassland biota, the grassland birds, the insects, the mammals, they are responding to this loss of the biome, right? So this is a paper that came out by Rosenberg et al. In 2019, last year. It made a lot of press because it's showing that 30% of the birds in North America have been lost between 1970 to 2019. And when they break it out in this B section here, they're showing the different guilds or functional groups of each that have been losing ground. And this tannish line here is the grassland birds. And just to highlight it here, this is probably the most provocative thing. Grassland birds have been the ones that have lost the most abundance since 1970 out of all the other ecoregions. So the Great Plains biome is really, really hurting, and not just in terms of land lost and in terms of the biodiversity. And Nebraska, unfortunately, is no stranger to this trend. So this is a image from Dylan Fogarty, who's going to be presenting in a few minutes here, from his paper that just came out in Sustainability. This is showing tree cover change in Nebraska from 2000 to 2017. All the red areas are areas where tree cover change is increasing. And it's a lot of the state, right? And it kind of seems like there's a trend from east to west or west to east. And it's kind of maybe moving from the east to the west. And the Loess Canyons is right there. And it's one of the worst hit places, right? So why do we think that this is one of the greatest conservation success stories in the Great Plains? Because indeed, we're seeing this happening, right? We're seeing this transition from grasslands with all the nice biodiversity that they have to these woodlands. And these are actually pictures from the Loess Canyons, right? An area that's looks nice and an area that's very tree infested. Well, we contend that this is one of the greatest success stories because of the groups that have collaborated and worked together very, very hard for many years to make these huge strides. The biggest one being the Loess Canyons Rangeland Alliance, which is a burn association made of private landowners who own lands within the Loess Canyons ecoregion. This is a banner from their website, and I think it's fantastic because of this. This is like the most important thing that they do. They take action, and they work with folks like the Nebraska Parks Commission, NRCS, and even us at UNL to have these huge outcomes, right? They use prescribed fire, high intensity prescribed fire in large areas to regenerate the land. And indeed, when they put this on the land, they're actually starting to push this backwards, right? They're starting to push this transition from woodlands back to grasslands. And I'm going to show you some evidence that this is happening and some other exciting results from that. The most important and interesting being that tree cover is actually responding at the level of an ecoregion to their work. So what this is showing here, this map, is the Loess Canyons ecoregion outlined in gray. All these green polygons in the center are areas where the Loess Canyons Rangeland Alliance and their partners have burnt on the landscape. And this graph right here is just showing cumulatively how much land they burnt over time in hectares, right? So a lot. And really, they've gone gangbusters, especially starting in the 2000 2010s. And this graph over here is showing tree cover change from the rangeland analysis platform data set with a breakpoint analysis. What this is showing is that there is a huge increase, and it was just speeding up in tree cover until when they started using fire like crazy, we actually see not only a leveling off of the tree cover change, but a slight decrease, right? We're seeing a lowering trend. They are having success at the scale of an ecoregion with their work, with their burning and in collaborations. But I think that the most compelling way to show this is not just through a time series, through points in time, but actually on a map. So this again is this Loess Canyons ecoregion with the tree cover or the sort of intensity of the tree regime in red and orange and yellow here, and the grassland biome in the blue. This is using a statistic called the spatial covariance that Daniel Uden published a couple of years ago. And this is just showing over here in this diagram how it works. Basically, this is an aerial photo, and the spatial covariance looks for boundaries between the grass and the trees. That's mostly kind of cool. You don't really have to think about it. You can kind of just say that the red is trees and the blue is grass. The more interesting thing is over time, we can see what has been lost, right? Between 2000 and 2010, we've lost a lot of ground in the Loess Canyons, but look how much they've gained back. And it's because of the management. These polygons here, the little black ones, are the holes that they've punched, areas that they've cleared with their big, large fires, their high intensity fires. And what can we learn from this? We can learn that large-scale spatial strategic management can halt regional scale transitions. The work that they're doing is working at a large scale, and we can see the results through time and in space. Very impressive, huge success, right? But because the Loess Canyons Rangeland Alliance, they're all ranchers, right? And so the thing that they really care about, the reason that they're managing these trees, is because they want to restore their bottom line, which has been lost to tree encroachment, right? And in fact, they are restoring that. And we can show that at multiple scales. So what you're seeing here are these aerial images in 3 different years in the area of the Loess Canyons, with these green dots indicating an area that was stable grassland over time, tree encroached over time, but then was burnt in 2016 and restored to a grassland. This is just showing under the hood some data that we use in the Google Earth Engine platform that can analyze this data. And when we extract at the pixel level, so just these 3 different points, we can see that what they have done on this landscape. So the different colored lines correspond to the different colored dots. So tree cover change in this red dot, no surprise, has really increased. The yellow dot really increased as well, but then bam, around in the early mid 2010s, it went down because they restored it. And in fact, they restored it to the level pretty much of an unburnt or unchanged grassland, this green one over here. They did that good of a job. But more importantly, they restored the biomass, the livestock forage on their lands. This yellow line showing that it was decreasing, but once they treated it, it went right back up to where this unburned or this uninvaded grassland was. This is a huge, compelling story, but it's just one pixel. It's just one area about the size of a baseball diamond. We can show even more than that. Because we've been working with the Loess Canyons Rangeland Alliance and folks out there, they've allowed us to use their management data, and so we can literally map every single pixel, which is what this is showing on any given management area that they have. So this is a management unit that was burned in 2012, and what this is a 3D image just showing every single pixel on this management unit, which is this little one right here. And the higher and yellower means that there's more biomass, and the lower and bluer means there's less, okay? So it was burnt in 2012. We can see that the grass is regenerating, and indeed we see that there's a huge increase after that in around 2016. Of course, there are some droughty years in here, but what we're seeing is we can map all this out, and because we can work with them, we can just see this in all angles and show all the success that they've had. It's pretty cool. But we can even do better than that. We can show what they've done at the level of the ecoregion, how much success they've had. So in the 1990s, what we're showing here is the total above ground biomass, all the livestock forests they had. In the 1990s, it was kind of going along pretty well. Tree cover change happened. It really blew up. And then in the 2002, the LCRA formed. And ever since then, we've seen a huge increase to above maybe even the 1990 levels. That's pretty awesome. So at the scale of the entire ecoregion, they have managed to restore livestock forage to what it was pre-tree invasion. That's amazing. But I'm a wildlife person, right? And a lot of y'all are too. So what are some interesting outcomes for the wildlife? Well, one is the endangered burying beetles abundance has increased due to their management out there. Now, the burying beetle pictured here has one of its last strongholds in Nebraska, specifically in the Loess Canyons. And they've been monitoring for the American burying beetle out there since 2007. And using some of their data and something called an in-mixture model, we won't get into the statistics very much. What we've seen is over time, with these black dots being the number of beetles per trap that they've had out there for their surveys, that between 2007 when they started and 2019, there's been a 50% increase in American burying beetle abundance. 2 more beetles per trap. This is an endangered species, and their management at this level of the ecoregion has increased their abundance by 50%. You don't see that very often for an endangered species. It's a really good story. But if we dig a little deeper, if you're not quite convinced that the burying beetle has been helped so much by their management, we can look at where the traps are versus what the abundance change has been in this landscape. So these black dots here are showing where the traps are, and the size of the dots is showing the estimated abundance per our model for these 2 years, 2007, 2019. And you can see in 2019, there's a lot more bigger dots, right? And where are they? They're in the areas where they've treated. They're predominantly in areas where they've managed to restore grasslands. So beetle abundance is increasing near large-scale management. Amazing outcome in this area. And if we interrogate this model a little bit more, we can look at different covariates, different factors on the landscape that are affecting the abundance. We'll focus on this one right here, the perennial forbs and grass cover, because it's the largest positive effect on the beetle abundance that we found. And what did we find? We find that this green highlighted management unit is about 570 hectares, which is about 1,500 acres. Managing for grasslands at large scales is the thing that increases beetle abundance the most. That's what our model found. And what we're saying is burning it at least 1,500 acres is the thing that's helping them. But not only that, our model is showing support for burning at even 29 or 4,300 acres is helping them a lot. So this is these polygons are just showing you, for instance, how much land that is relative to the rest of the Loess Canyons. Burning at 4,300 acres really helps the American burying beetle abundance. It's a pretty exciting outcome. But wait, there's more. The grassland bird diversity has stabilized. And if you'll remember from the beginning, grassland birds were doing the worst in the Great Plains and North America. But what we're showing with some BBS data that was taken by TJ Walker from 2010 to 2016, grassland bird richness or diversity has, we say, stabilized, although there has been a slight uptick in it over time, over these years, which is just bucking the trend of the entire biome. It's amazing. And if we look a little bit deeper, what we see is the bigger the area, the more diversity you get. So what these lines are showing in the blue is that when you treat a larger area, so the 6,500 hectares, or that's about 13,000 acres, you get more increase in diversity than when you treat a smaller area. So more area treated, more bigger burns equals more bird diversity for grassland birds. And finally, we looked at where exactly these grassland birds were increasing. We just picked out 2 of the more abundant species, and just to sort of convince ourselves that this is the management that's doing this. It's not some other phenomenon, right? Kind of like what we did with the beetles. What these maps are showing for bobwhite and for western meadowlark is where their abundance, their relative abundance, has increased on the landscape. So the yellower areas are areas where there's higher abundance. And over these 6 years, we see that indeed where they've treated is where the abundance is increasing, where the yellow, where the lights are coming back on for these birds, right? That's a really good and heartwarming story. And if we just look on the Loess Canyon Rangeland Alliance's website, they have listed actually what they've achieved. They have all these great points that they have on there, but I think that from what we've seen today, what we can add is 4 other, just other points. I hope that they add them onto their website actually. They've halted a regional scale grassland woodland transition. They've restored livestock forage at the scale of the ecoregion. They've increased the abundance of a nationally endangered species, an endangered species that has just disappeared throughout the nation. And they've stabilized grassland bird diversity, where we've seen throughout the Great Plains that is tanking. So I'll end with asking again, is the Loess Canyons ecoregion one of the greatest conservation success stories in the Great Plains? We think it is, and we're looking for examples of the other examples that compete with it, but we just haven't seen them yet. So it's a really exciting thing for Nebraska to hold up and to be proud of, and especially for all the collaborators out there to say, look what we've done, and what can we learn from this? I think what we can learn from it is that large-scale fires, high-intensity fires, help on the landscape, and everyone working together with agencies and private landowners, that's the thing that really helps. So with that, I'll conclude. Thanks for listening, and I'll be happy to take any questions.